My name is Vanessa Chin. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent the last decade building something extraordinary while my family assumed I was barely scraping by. This Thanksgiving, as my father raised his glass to toast my brother's real success, he had no idea that the Gulfstream G650 landing on the private airstrip behind our family estate was mine. What happened next changed everything. If you're watching this from a place where family expectations don't match your reality, drop a comment below and subscribe to see how one moment of truth transformed my relationship with my family forever. I grew up in Palo Alto, California, in a sprawling Mediterranean-style home that screamed Silicon Valley success. My father, David Chin, had built Chin Technologies from the ground up in the early 1990s, riding the first dot-com wave to create a semiconductor components company that eventually sold for $180 million. He retired at 55, wealthy beyond most people's dreams, and spent the next decade investing in other people's startups while reminding everyone who would listen about his business acumen. My mother, Patricia, came from old San Francisco money. The kind of family that had their names on hospital wings and museum galleries. She approached life with the refined detachment of someone who had never worried about money, never questioned her place in the world, and never understood why anyone would choose struggle over comfort. Then there were the children. My older brother, Marcus, 36, was the undisputed favorite from the moment he was born. He had my father's sharp features and business instinct, or so everyone claimed. Marcus went to Stanford for his MBA, naturally funded entirely by our parents, and immediately after graduation was handed a C-suite position at one of Dad's portfolio companies. His path was paved with gold, every connection made for him, every door opened before he even knocked. I was different from the start. While Marcus excelled at networking and golf, I was the kid taking apart computers in the garage, teaching myself to code at age 11 and building my first app at 14. I studied computer science at UC Berkeley, not Stanford, which disappointed my father, and graduated with honors. But unlike Marcus, I was expected to make my own way. "You're capable, Vanessa," Dad would say with a dismissive wave. Figure it out like I did. The double standard was glaring, but somehow normalized in our family. Marcus received a $500,000 investment from Dad the year he graduated. I received a $5,000 check and a lecture about bootstrapping. When Marcus bought his first house, Dad contributed $200,000 for the down payment. When I asked for help with my student loans, I was told that I had chosen a state school, so I should be able to handle the debt. My younger sister, Jessica, 29, rounded out our family dynamic. She had wisely chosen the path of least resistance, marrying a tech executive at 26 and dedicating herself to charity galas and lifestyle blogging. Our parents approved wholeheartedly. "At least Jessica knows what matters," Mom would say pointedly whenever I mentioned my work. Family gatherings always centered around Marcus's achievements. Every dinner conversation eventually circled back to his latest business deal, his promotion, his growing investment portfolio. Dad would lean back in his chair, scotch in hand, and hold court about how Marcus had inherited his entrepreneurial spirit, his killer instinct, his understanding of what it takes to build real wealth. I would sit quietly at these dinners, my own accomplishments invisible. When I tried to share professional milestones, Dad would smile indulgently and say something like, "That's nice, sweetheart. How's your apartment? Still in that neighborhood?" The implication was clear: my choices, my career, my entire life was somehow less legitimate than Marcus's trajectory. The breaking point that pushed me to leave came during Thanksgiving dinner when I was 23. I had just been promoted to senior developer at a promising startup, and I was excited to share the news. As we sat around the table laden with food our housekeeper had prepared, I waited for a lull in conversation. "I have some good news," I announced, setting down my wine glass. "I just got promoted to senior developer, and I'll be leading a team of 5 engineers." There was a brief pause, then Dad nodded vaguely. "That's nice. What's the salary increase?" "About 15%, I replied, feeling my excitement dim. "Well, that's something," he said, already turning to Marcus. "Son, tell everyone about the Henderson deal you closed." And just like that, my achievement was dismissed, forgotten before dessert was served. Marcus launched into a detailed account of his latest business triumph, embellishing details about his strategic thinking while conveniently omitting that Dad had introduced him to the client personally. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision. I would leave the Bay Area, leave the family dynamics that suffocated me, and build something so undeniable that even my father couldn't dismiss it. But I would do it my way on my terms, without their money or their connections. 3 weeks after that Thanksgiving, I packed everything I owned into my aging Honda Civic and drove north to Seattle. I had $8,000 in savings, a job offer from a small tech startup, and a burning determination to prove my worth, though I was no longer sure who I was trying to prove it to. My parents were predictably condescending about my decision. "Seattle?" my mother said, wrinkling her nose. "But there's so much opportunity here in the Bay Area. Why would you leave?" "Because I need to build something that's mine," I explained, not expecting her to understand. Dad was more direct. "Running away from family never solved anything, Vanessa. But if you want to learn the hard way, that's your choice." Marcus, to his credit, seemed genuinely confused. "I don't get it, V. You could work at any of Dad's companies. Why make it harder on yourself?" "Because your path isn't available to me," I wanted to say. "Because I need to know if I can succeed without the Chin name opening doors." But I just hugged him and promised to visit. My first apartment in Seattle was a studio in Capitol Hill that cost $1,200 a month, nearly half my take-home pay. The building was old, the walls paper-thin, and I could hear my neighbors arguing most nights. But it was mine. I furnished it with items from Craigslist and IKEA, learning to assemble furniture and fix leaky faucets because I couldn't afford to call maintenance for every issue. The startup I joined, Dataflow, was exactly what I needed. We were building cloud infrastructure solutions for enterprise clients, work that was technically challenging and constantly evolving. I threw myself into it completely, working 70-hour weeks, learning new programming languages, and slowly building a reputation as someone who could solve impossible problems. But here's the thing about my family, they never really asked what I was doing. During our weekly phone calls, Mom would inquire about my apartment, my dating life, whether I was eating well. Dad would occasionally remember to ask about work, but his attention would drift the moment I started explaining technical details. Their messages were clear. What I was doing wasn't important enough to understand. "How's your little tech job?" Dad asked during one call, using the diminutive that made me clench my jaw. "It's going well," I replied, not bothering to mention that I had just designed an architecture that had reduced our clients' costs by 40%. "That's good. Marcus just brought in a $2 million client. We're very proud." After 2 years at Dataflow, I had saved enough to begin planning my own venture. I had identified a massive problem in cloud computing, the difficulty of migrating legacy systems to modern infrastructure without disrupting business operations. The existing solutions were clunky, expensive, and required extensive manual intervention. I spent every spare moment developing a proprietary migration tool, using artificial intelligence to automate processes that typically took months of consulting work. I called it Cascade, and I knew it could be revolutionary. I left Dataflow and founded my company, Cascade Solutions, under a different name, Vanessa Morgan. The Chin name had never served me professionally, and I wanted my success or failure to be completely disconnected from my family's reputation. I took on freelance contracts to pay my bills while developing the product, living on ramen and coffee, reinvesting every dollar into the business. The first year was brutal. I worked from my tiny apartment, often until 3 or 4 in the morning, then caught a few hours of sleep before starting again. I attended countless networking events, pitched to anyone who would listen, and slowly built a small client base. The technology worked. It was brilliant, actually, but convincing enterprise clients to trust a startup run by a 26-year-old woman was challenging. My family had no idea what I was actually doing. During holiday visits, which became increasingly rare, I would describe my work vaguely as consulting or freelance development. They assumed I was struggling, barely making ends meet. Marcus would occasionally offer to put in a word with his connections, a well-meaning gesture that felt like pity. You know, V, if you ever want to come back to California, I could probably get you a job at one of my companies, he offered during one Christmas dinner. I'm good, I replied, smiling tightly. Really enjoying Seattle. Mom would exchange glances with Dad, their expressions saying what they wouldn't. When is she going to grow up and get a real job? The breakthrough came during my third year. A mid-sized healthcare company hired Cascade Solutions for a pilot project, migrating their patient record system to a HIPAA-compliant cloud infrastructure. It was the kind of complex, high-stakes project that established firms charged $500,000 for and took 6 months to complete. Using Cascade's AI-driven automation, we completed it in 6 weeks for $150,000, with zero downtime and zero data loss. The healthcare company's CIO was so impressed that he introduced me to his peer network. Suddenly, I had referrals coming from companies I had only dreamed of working with. Within 6 months, I had 15 major clients. Within a year, I had hired a team of 20 talented engineers. By year 5, Cascade Solutions had offices in Seattle, Austin, and Boston, with 150 employees and annual revenue exceeding $50 million. The validation came when I secured Series B funding. $80 million from top-tier venture capital firms at a valuation of $400 million. The partners weren't investing in potential. They were investing in proven technology and a business model that was already profitable and scaling rapidly. Throughout this journey, I maintained my distance from my family. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed to build this empire without their influence, without their judgment, without the constant comparison to Marcus's accomplishments. I would visit for major holidays, always staying in a hotel rather than the family home, always keeping conversations superficial. During one Thanksgiving visit when Cascade was just beginning to scale, Dad asked about my work over dinner. Still doing that consulting thing in Seattle? Something like that, I replied, taking a sip of wine. You know, it's never too late to pivot into something more stable, he continued. Marcus could probably help you find a position with better benefits. At your age, you should be thinking about retirement planning. I was 28 years old, running a company worth millions, and he was concerned about my 401k. Marcus, lounging in his chair with the ease of someone who had never worried about money, added his perspective. Dad's right, V. The gig economy is fine for a while, but eventually you need stability. Health insurance, stock options, that kind of thing. I bit back my response. I had excellent health insurance through my company. I owned millions in stock, my own company's stock. But explaining this would require revealing what I had built, and I wasn't ready. Some petty part of me wanted them to discover it themselves, to realize they had been consistently underestimating me. By the time I turned 30, Cascade Solutions had attracted acquisition offers from major tech companies. I turned them all down. This wasn't about a quick exit. It was about building something lasting. We continued growing, expanding internationally, developing new products that solved adjacent problems in the enterprise cloud space. I purchased my first truly extravagant asset at 31, a Gulfstream G650 private jet. It was excessive, unnecessary, and absolutely perfect. I told myself it was a business tool, which it partially was. But mainly, it was a symbol. A $70 million symbol that I had made it on my own terms. The jet became my mobile office, outfitted with secure communications and a workspace where I could be productive during the countless hours spent traveling to client meetings and conferences. But it was also my private space, luxuriously appointed with cream leather seats, handcrafted woodwork, and technology that rivaled anything on the market. I named it Phoenix, not ironically, but intentionally. I had risen from the ashes of my family's dismissiveness to create something remarkable. As I prepared for Thanksgiving this year, I knew it was time. Time to stop hiding my success. Time to stop accepting their casual dismissiveness. Time to show them exactly what Vanessa's little consulting thing had become. I arrived at my parents' Palo Alto estate 2 days before Thanksgiving, driving a rental car from the San Francisco airport rather than arranging for the jet to land at a nearby private field. I wanted the reveal to be perfectly timed, and that meant maintaining the charade a bit longer. The house looked exactly as I remembered: Mediterranean architecture with terracotta tiles, a sprawling courtyard with a fountain, and the kind of manicured gardens that required a full-time landscaping crew. Multiple luxury cars lined the circular driveway: Marcus's new Porsche 911, Jessica's Mercedes SUV, and our parents' matching Tesla Model XS. Mom greeted me at the door with her usual air kiss and immediate critique. "Vanessa, you made it. Are you staying here or at a hotel again?" "Hotel," I confirmed, noting her barely concealed disapproval. "I have some work calls I need to take privately." "Still working too much," she sighed, leading me inside. "You know, at your age, you should be thinking about finding a partner, settling down. Jessica is already talking about having a second baby." The house was full of family. Marcus with his wife Amanda, Jessica with her husband Christopher and their toddler, various aunts and uncles, and our parents presiding over it all like benevolent monarchs. Everyone was dressed in expensive casual wear, the kind of effortlessly put-together look that required considerable effort and money. I had dressed deliberately simply: dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, and minimal jewelry. I knew they would interpret this as evidence of my continued financial modesty, and that was exactly what I wanted them to think. "Vanessa," Marcus called out, crossing the room to hug me. "Looking good, sis. How's Seattle treating you?" "Really well," I replied, returning his embrace. Marcus had never been intentionally cruel. He was simply oblivious to his privilege, unable to see the advantages that had been handed to him. We settled into the familiar rhythm of family gatherings. Dad held court in his study with Marcus and Uncle Robert, discussing investment strategies and market trends. Mom orchestrated the Thanksgiving preparations with military precision, delegating tasks to the catering staff she had hired for the week. Jessica managed her toddler while simultaneously posting Instagram stories about blessed family time. I floated through these scenes, participating but separate, a ghost in my own family's life. That evening at dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to success and achievement. Dad launched into his favorite story about building Chin Technologies, a narrative I had heard dozens of times, always with the same emphasis on his self-made journey, his strategic brilliance, his refusal to accept defeat. "The point is," he concluded, gesturing with his scotch glass, "success comes from taking risks, from having vision, from understanding business fundamentals. It's not something you can learn in a classroom, it's instinctive." Marcus nodded along, as if he had demonstrated any of these qualities rather than coasting on Dad's connections. "Speaking of success," Uncle Robert interjected, "I heard Marcus just closed another major deal." "What was it? 5 million in revenue." 6 million, Marcus corrected with false modesty. "But it's really about building long-term client relationships, you know?" Everyone murmured appreciatively. Dad beamed with pride. Mom reached over to squeeze Marcus's hand. The golden child had performed as expected. "And what about you, Vanessa?" Aunt Linda asked, perhaps feeling I had been ignored too long. "How's work in Seattle?" All eyes turned to me. I could feel their collective assumption that I would share some modest update about my consulting projects, perhaps mention a new client or a small milestone. They were prepared to offer polite encouragement before swiftly moving on to more important topics. "It's going well," I said simply. "Keeping busy." "Still doing the freelance thing?" Dad asked, unable to hide the slight disappointment in his voice. "Have you thought about getting a more stable position?" There's no shame in working for an established company. Not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur. The irony of this statement coming from a man who had constantly berated me for not having his entrepreneurial drive was almost laughable. "I like what I'm doing," I replied evenly. Mom chimed in with her own brand of concern. "I just worry about you up there alone, working all the time. At your age, you should be thinking about your future, about family. All that work won't keep you warm at night." Jessica, perhaps trying to be helpful, added, "You know, Christopher's firm is always looking for talented people." I could ask him to set up an interview if you want something more stable. I smiled, letting them misunderstand, letting them assume I needed their pity and their potential rescue. Just one more day, I told myself. One more day of this, and then everything changes. Thanksgiving morning arrived with typical California sunshine. I woke early in my hotel suite. A penthouse at the Four Seasons with a view of the bay that had cost $2,000 for the night and made final preparations for the day ahead. I had coordinated every detail with precision. The jet was fueled and ready at Palo Alto Airport's private terminal with my pilots, Captain Richardson and First Officer Hayes, standing by. I had arranged for the aircraft to perform a low approach over my parents' property at exactly 4 p.m., landing at the private airstrip behind their estate. A strip that Dad had installed years ago but rarely used since selling his company. The timing had to be perfect. According to my mother's detailed schedule, which she had emailed to all family members, dinner would be served at 3 p.m., with dessert and coffee following around 4 p.m. That's when Dad traditionally gave his Thanksgiving toast, a lengthy speech about gratitude, success, and the Chin family legacy. I dressed carefully for the occasion, a silk blouse, tailored slacks, and a Patek Philippe watch that had cost more than most people's cars. The watch was my only obvious extravagance, and I suspected most of my family wouldn't recognize its value. To them, it would just be another watch. I arrived at the family estate at 2:30 p.m., finding the house in full Thanksgiving chaos. The dining room table was set with Mom's best china, crystal wine glasses, and elaborate floral centerpieces. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, though I knew most of the cooking had been done by the catering staff Mom had hired. "Vanessa, finally," Mom called out. "Can you help Jessica set out the appetizers?" For the next hour, I participated in the familiar dance of family gathering preparation. I arranged cheese plates, filled water glasses, made small talk with relatives I barely knew. Everyone was in a festive mood, laughing and drinking wine, discussing their various successes and plans. At 3 p.m., we all sat down to dinner. The table was crowded with family, parents, siblings, spouses, children, aunts, uncles, cousins. I found myself seated at the far end, away from the center of power where Dad presided with Marcus to his right. The meal began with Dad carving the turkey, a tradition he insisted on performing himself despite the caterer's offers to help. As he carved, he pontificated about the symbolism of Thanksgiving, about abundance and achievement, about the American dream that his own life embodied. Plates were passed, wine was poured, and conversation flowed. Marcus dominated much of the dinner discussion, talking about his latest business ventures with the ease of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. He had recently been promoted to CEO of one of Dad's portfolio companies, a move that surprised no one. "I'm really excited about the direction we're taking," Marcus explained to the table. "We're projecting 25% growth this year, and I've been working on some innovative strategies to expand our market share." "That's my boy," Dad interjected proudly. "Always thinking 3 steps ahead. That's what separates real business leaders from everyone else, vision and execution." I checked my watch discreetly. 3:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, everything would change. As the caterers began clearing dinner plates and bringing out dessert, an array of pies and elaborate chocolate cake, Dad stood and tapped his wine glass with his knife. The table fell silent, everyone turning their attention to the patriarch. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," Dad began, falling into the cadence of his annual Thanksgiving speech. "Family is everything, and seeing all of you gathered here reminds me of how fortunate we are." He continued for several minutes, talking about gratitude, about the importance of hard work, about the values that had guided his own success. It was a speech I had heard variations of my entire life, always centered on his achievements, always implicitly comparing the rest of us to his standards. "This year, I want to especially recognize Marcus," Dad said, turning to my brother. "You've really stepped up, son. Taking on the CEO role, bringing in major clients, proving that you have what it takes to build real success. Not everyone has that killer instinct, that understanding of what business really requires. Marcus stood briefly, accepting the praise with practiced humility. Thanks, Dad. I learned from the best. Dad beamed, then continued. That's what I mean by real success. It's not about having a job or keeping busy. It's about building something significant, about making an impact, about understanding how wealth is actually created in this country. I glanced at my watch. 3:58 p.m. Some people, Dad continued, and I knew with absolute certainty he was building to a point about me, some people chase after small opportunities, content with mediocrity. They work hard, sure, but they lack vision. They lack the strategic thinking that separates successful entrepreneurs from people who just have jobs. I could feel eyes beginning to drift toward me, the family dynamic so well established that everyone knew who the implicit comparison was targeting. But Marcus, Dad raised his glass. Marcus understands what real success looks like. So let's toast. That's when we heard it. A low, distinctive sound that made everyone pause. The whine of jet engines, growing louder, approaching from the north. What is that? Mom asked, frowning at the interruption. The sound intensified, and through the dining room's floor-to-ceiling windows, we could see it, a gleaming white Gulfstream G650, descending in a perfect approach pattern, heading directly toward the private airstrip behind the property. Everyone stood, drawn to the windows by curiosity and confusion. The jet was magnificent, its sleek profile unmistakable even to those who knew nothing about aircraft. It made a low pass over the house, close enough that we could see the Phoenix logo on its tail, before continuing toward the landing strip. Who is that? Dad demanded, confusion breaking through his interrupted toast. I didn't approve any flights today. I remained seated, calmly taking a sip of wine. That's mine, I said quietly. The words didn't register at first. The family was too busy watching the jet's perfect landing, the way it touched down smoothly on the private strip, then taxied toward the hangar. What did you say? Marcus turned from the window, confusion on his face. I stood, setting down my napkin with deliberate care. I said that's my jet. I thought I'd fly down instead of driving this year. Complete silence. Mom's mouth opened and closed without sound. Dad stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Marcus looked between me and the jet, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. Your jet. Dad finally managed. Vanessa, what are you talking about? That's a Gulfstream G650. Those cost around $70 million, I finished calmly. More with the customizations I requested. This is some kind of joke, Jessica said, her phone halfway to her face, as if preparing to document whatever was happening. No joke, I replied. Would you like to see the registration documents? It's registered to Cascade Solutions, my company. The name meant nothing to them, which was exactly what I had expected. I don't understand, Mom said faintly, sinking back into her chair. What company? I pulled out my phone and opened the Forbes article that had run 6 months ago. The headline read, Cascade Solutions, the $2 billion cloud migration company you've never heard of. I passed the phone to Marcus, watching his face as he began to read. It says Cascade Solutions is valued at $2 billion, he read aloud, his voice tight. Founded and led by CEO Vanessa Morgan. He looked up at me. Vanessa Morgan? That's you. That's me, I confirmed. Chen is my family name. Morgan is my professional name. I started Cascade Solutions 10 years ago, shortly after moving to Seattle. We develop AI-powered solutions for enterprise cloud migration. Dad grabbed the phone from Marcus, scrolling through the article with shaking hands. His face had gone from confused to pale as he read about revenue numbers, client lists that included Fortune 500 companies, and my personal net worth, estimated at $800 million. I don't believe this, he muttered. This has to be a mistake. Some kind of identity confusion. Would you like to see more proof? I asked, pulling up my company website on my phone. Here's our corporate page. Here's my bio. Here are several interviews I've done with TechCrunch, Business Insider, and the Wall Street Journal. I passed my phone around the table, watching their faces as they confronted the reality of my success. Uncle Robert looked stunned. Aunt Linda kept squinting at the photos as if they might be fabricated. Jessica had gone completely silent, all thoughts of Instagram documentation apparently forgotten. How? Mom finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How did we not know about any of this? You never asked, I replied simply. Every time I came home, you assumed I was struggling with my little consulting thing. Every phone call, you asked about my apartment, my dating life, whether I was eating enough vegetables. No one ever actually asked about my work. And when I tried to explain what I was doing, your eyes would glaze over because it didn't sound as impressive as Marcus's job titles. Marcus had recovered enough to become defensive. Come on, V. If this is all true, why didn't you just tell us? Would you have believed me? I challenged. Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating, delusional, or having some kind of breakdown? Remember when I tried to tell Dad about my first major client at a Sunday dinner 3 years ago? He cut me off to ask Marcus about his golf handicap. Dad's face had gone from pale to red. That's not fair, Vanessa. We've always supported you. No, I corrected gently. You've always tolerated my choices while making it clear you thought they were inferior to Marcus's path. There's a difference between support and polite disappointment. The table remained silent, the weight of years of casual dismissal suddenly visible to everyone. I need proof, Dad said finally, his tone desperate. Anyone can show me articles and websites. I need to see actual proof that you own this company, that this isn't some elaborate prank. I pulled out my wallet and extracted a black American Express Centurion card, the famous invitation-only card with no spending limit. This is my corporate card. Would you like me to call the pilot and have him bring the registration documents? Or perhaps I could show you the last quarterly report showing $150 million in revenue. How? Mom repeated, still stuck on that single question. How did you build something like this? The same way Dad built his company, I replied. Hard work, long hours, solving problems that other people couldn't solve. I saw a gap in the market, enterprise companies struggling to migrate legacy systems to cloud infrastructure, and I developed technology that automated what typically required months of consulting work. The first few years were brutal. I lived on ramen, worked 18-hour days, took on debt, made sacrifices. But unlike some people, I glanced at Marcus. I didn't have anyone handing me capital or connections. I bootstrapped everything. Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. And you did all this, Dad said slowly, while letting us think you were barely making ends meet? I let you think what you wanted to think, I corrected. Every time I came home, you made assumptions based on your own biases. You saw a woman working in tech without a fancy title, and you assumed failure. You never asked for details because you weren't interested in details that didn't fit your narrative. The truth of this statement settled over the table like a cold fog. For several long minutes, no one spoke. The Thanksgiving feast sat abandoned on the table, desserts untouched, wine growing warm in glasses. Outside, through the windows, the Gulf Stream sat gleaming on the tarmac, impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away. Finally, Uncle Robert broke the silence. I'll be damned, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Vanessa, I had no idea. This is incredible. Thank you, I replied, appreciating his genuine response. Jessica had her phone out now, but not for Instagram. She was clearly Googling Cascade Solutions, her eyes growing wider with each result. V, there are articles about you everywhere. TechCrunch, Forbes, Bloomberg. How did we not know about any of this? You didn't look, I said simply. My professional name is different, and you had no reason to search for information about what I was doing. You had already decided I was struggling, so why would you investigate further? Mom had tears in her eyes, though I couldn't tell if they were from pride, shame, or simple shock. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied, my voice softer now. I didn't do this for recognition or to prove anything to you. I did it for myself, to build something meaningful, to see what I was capable of without the Chin name opening doors for me. Marcus was scrolling through articles on his own phone now, his expression growing more troubled with each headline. It says here you turned down a $1.5 billion acquisition offer from Microsoft last year. I did, I confirmed. I'm not interested in selling. I'm interested in building a company that lasts, that solves real problems, that changes how enterprises approach cloud infrastructure. Dad had gone very quiet, his earlier bravado completely deflated. He was staring at the Gulf Stream through the window, his expression unreadable. "Dad," I said gently, "you were saying something about real success?" He turned to look at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him truly see me. Not as the daughter who didn't quite measure up, not as the child who had made disappointing choices, but as a peer. As someone who had achieved what he claimed to value above all else. "I was wrong," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "About you. About what you were doing. I was completely wrong." It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever heard from him. "I'm sorry," Mom added, reaching across the table toward me. "We should have asked more questions. We should have been more interested in your work. We just assumed. You assumed that because I didn't follow Marcus's path, I must be failing. I finished for her. And that says more about your biases than it does about my choices." The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. Marcus admitted that he had always benefited from Dad's connections, but had never acknowledged how much that advantage had shaped his success. Jessica confessed that she had looked down on my work because it wasn't something she could easily photograph or brag about. My parents gradually confronted the reality of their favoritism, the ways they had consistently valued certain types of success over others. "I don't understand why you didn't just tell us," Dad kept saying, as if the failure to communicate was primarily mine. "Because I needed to build this without your influence," I explained patiently. "If I had come to you 3 years in and said, 'I'm starting a tech company,' what would you have done?" He started to protest, then stopped. We both knew the answer. He would have offered unwanted advice, made introductions that came with strings attached, probably tried to invest with conditions that gave him control. He would have turned my independent venture into another extension of his business philosophy. I needed to know I could do this alone, I continued. That my success wasn't because of the Chin name or Dad's connections. That it was mine. "And you did," Marcus said, something like respect creeping into his voice. "You built something bigger than Dad's company, bigger than anything I'm likely to achieve. And you did it without any of the advantages I've had." The acknowledgement from my brother meant more than he probably realized. As the shock began to fade, practical questions emerged. How many employees did I have? 230. Where were our offices? Seattle, New York, London, and Singapore. What were our growth projections? 40% year over year. What was my role in day-to-day operations? Very involved, though I had an excellent executive team. The jet, which had precipitated this entire revelation, became a natural topic of fascination. Would I really take people on a tour? Of course. One by one, family members made the walk across the property to the hangar where Phoenix waited. Captain Richardson greeted us professionally, clearly accustomed to VIP tours. The interior of the jet was even more impressive up close. Cream leather seats that converted to beds, a conference area with video conferencing capabilities, a full galley, and a bathroom that rivaled luxury hotels. "This is incredible," Jessica breathed, running her hand along the polished wood trim. "I can't believe this is yours." "It's primarily for business," I explained, though we all knew that was only partially true. "I spend a lot of time meeting with clients across the country and internationally. The jet allows me to work while traveling and maintain a much more efficient schedule." Dad was quiet during the tour, his eyes taking in every detail. When we returned to the house, he asked if we could speak privately in his study. Dad's study had always been his sanctuary, filled with memorabilia from his own business success, framed magazine covers, awards, photos with various tech industry luminaries. I had been summoned to this room countless times over the years, usually for lectures about responsibility, realistic expectations, or the gap between my choices and his hopes for me. Now, sitting across from him in the leather chairs he reserved for important conversations, the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. "I owe you an apology," he began without preamble. "A significant one." I waited, letting him find his words. "I've spent your entire adult life convinced that I knew what success looked like, what the right path was. And I projected that onto you and Marcus in different ways. He paused, collecting his thoughts. With Marcus, I gave him every advantage, opened every door, and congratulated myself on his achievements as if they proved my parenting strategy was correct. With you, I withheld support because I genuinely believed you were making poor choices, wasting your potential. You thought I was failing, I said quietly. I didn't understand what you were building, he corrected. And instead of trying to learn about your work, I dismissed it because it didn't fit my preconceptions. That's on me, not you. It was the most self-aware thing I had ever heard my father say. When I built Chin Technologies, he continued, I did it with chip on my shoulder, with something to prove. I wanted to show everyone who had doubted me that I could succeed. And I did. But in the process, I became exactly like the people who had dismissed me, unable to see success that didn't match my specific vision of it. You see the irony, I observed. I see it very clearly now. He met my eyes. You did what I always claimed to value. You took a risk. You built something from nothing. You proved your capabilities without asking for handouts. And I didn't even notice because I was too busy assuming you were struggling. We sat in silence for a moment, decades of misunderstanding hanging in the air between us. I'm proud of you, Vanessa, Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. Not just because of the financial success or the company valuation, but because you had the integrity to do it your way. You didn't compromise your vision to please me or take shortcuts using my connections. You built something genuine. Hearing those words from him, words I had unconsciously craved my entire life, felt surreal. But they also felt incomplete, like they came too late to undo years of dismissal. I appreciate that, Dad, I replied carefully. But here's what I need you to understand. I stopped needing your approval somewhere around year 3 of building Cascade. I realized that I was running a race where you kept moving the finish line. No achievement was ever quite enough, no success quite legitimate because it didn't match the path you valued. He winced, but didn't interrupt. I'm not angry anymore, I continued. I'm grateful, actually. Your dismissal forced me to develop a level of determination and self-sufficiency I might not have otherwise needed. But going forward, our relationship has to be different. I can't go back to being the daughter whose achievements are footnotes to Marcus's career updates. You won't be, Dad promised. I can't undo the past, but I can commit to doing better going forward. That's all I'm asking, I said. We talked for another hour, honestly and openly in a way we never had before. Dad shared his own insecurities, his fears that he had peaked early and that his children's achievements would always be measured against his. I shared the loneliness of building Cascade while feeling disconnected from my family, the times I had wanted to call home with good news but knew it would be diminished or ignored. I want to know about your work, Dad said as our conversation wound down. Really know about it. The technology, the business model, your vision for the future. Will you teach me? I'd like that, I replied, meaning it. The days following Thanksgiving brought unexpected shifts in my family dynamics. Marcus called the day after, asking if we could have lunch, just the two of us. We met at a cafe near Stanford, neutral territory away from family intensity. I've been thinking a lot since yesterday, he began, stirring his coffee absently. About all the advantages I've had that I took for granted. About how I probably wouldn't have achieved half of what I have without Dad's help. You would have achieved something, I said fairly. Maybe not exactly the same path, but you're talented, Marcus. You just had a much easier road than most people get. Than you got, he corrected. I'm sorry. For not recognizing what you were dealing with, for not standing up when Dad dismissed your work. For being so absorbed in my own career that I didn't even ask meaningful questions about yours. His apology was sincere, and I accepted it. We spent the next 2 hours talking honestly about our childhood, the different expectations placed on us, the ways family dynamics had shaped our relationship. For the first time, I felt like I had a brother rather than a rival. Can I ask you something? Marcus said as we prepared to leave. Why didn't you tell me specifically? We're siblings. You could have confided in me even if you didn't want the parents to know. I considered the question carefully. Because you were so embedded in Dad's world, in his way of thinking. I couldn't be sure you wouldn't tell them, or that you wouldn't unconsciously judge my choices through their lens. I needed complete separation to build what I was building. He nodded slowly. That makes sense. And it says something depressing about our relationship that you felt you couldn't trust me. We can build something different now, I offered. I'd like that. Mom took longer to process everything. She called several times over the next week, conversations that circled around her confusion and hurt feelings. How could I have kept such a significant part of my life hidden? Didn't I trust my own mother? I tried to explain the years of casual dismissal, the way my work had been treated as a phase I would eventually outgrow, the assumption that my choices were lesser versions of success. She struggled to hear it, caught between defending her past behavior and acknowledging its impact. I thought I was being supportive, she insisted during one call. I never told you to quit, never pressured you to come back to California. That's true, I agreed. But support isn't just the absence of active discouragement. It's genuine interest, asking questions, celebrating milestones. You did those things for Marcus's career. You never did them for mine. The conversation was difficult, but necessary. Slowly, painfully, we began to build a different kind of relationship, one based on honesty rather than her idealized version of maternal support. Jessica surprised me the most. She showed up at my hotel a week after Thanksgiving, asking if we could talk. Over coffee, she confessed that my revelation had forced her to confront her own life choices. I've built my entire identity around being Christopher's wife, around charity galas and Instagram aesthetics, she admitted. Watching you stand there and reveal that you had built something so substantial while we all patronized you, it made me realize how shallow my life has become. Your choices are valid, Jess, I said gently. Not everyone wants to build a company or work 80-hour weeks. But I don't want to be as dismissive as Mom and Dad were, she continued. I want to actually understand what you've built, what drives you. I want my daughter to see that women can achieve extraordinary things. We spent the afternoon talking about ambition, about different definitions of success, about the ways societal expectations shaped our choices. Jessica admitted she had always resented my independence, even while pretending to pity my struggles. I admitted I had judged her choices as shallow without understanding her own journey. By the time we parted, we had reached a new understanding, not quite close, but honest in a way we had never been before. 6 months after that Thanksgiving revelation, my relationship with my family had transformed in ways I couldn't have anticipated. We weren't perfect, old patterns occasionally resurfaced, but we were honest, and that made all the difference. Dad had become genuinely interested in Cascade Solutions. We had quarterly calls where I walked him through our business strategy, new product developments, and market expansion plans. He offered insights based on his own experience, but framed them as suggestions rather than directives. For the first time, we related as peers in the business world. Marcus and I had developed a real friendship. We met monthly for dinner when I was in California, comparing notes on leadership challenges and industry trends. He had become more thoughtful about his own advantages and had started mentoring young entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds, trying to provide the support he had received to those who typically lacked it. Mom remained the most complicated relationship. She wanted to be involved in my life, but struggled to accept that her previous involvement had been so inadequate. We were rebuilding slowly, with clear boundaries about what kind of support I needed versus what she was comfortable providing. The most significant change came from how my parents spoke about their children to others. I heard through family members that Dad now introduced all his children with equal pride, describing my company with the same enthusiasm he had previously reserved for Marcus's achievements. Mom had apparently become insufferable at her social club, bringing up Cascade Solutions at every opportunity. It was simultaneously gratifying and frustrating. I didn't need their validation anymore, but I couldn't deny that receiving it felt good. I also made peace with the jet incident, which had become family legend. Initially, I worried that the dramatic reveal made me seem petty or showboating. But over time, I came to see it as necessary. Sometimes, people need undeniable proof before they can overcome their preconceptions. The jet had been that proof. Too substantial to dismiss, too expensive to explain away. And honestly, it had felt good. After years of being invisible, of having my achievements minimized, of being treated as the disappointing daughter, there was satisfaction in that moment of recognition. Not because I needed their approval, but because I had earned the right to my own success narrative. As I sit in my Seattle office, looking out over Elliott Bay, I think about the journey that brought me here. About the 23-year-old who drove north with $8,000 and a determination to prove something. About the years of 18-hour days and ramen dinners and code that wouldn't compile at 3 a.m. I think about the moment I decided to hide my success from my family, a decision that seemed petty but was actually self-preservation. I needed to build Cascade without their influence, without their judgment, without the constant comparison to Marcus's golden path. I think about that Thanksgiving dinner, about my father's toast to real success moments before my jet landed outside. About the looks on their faces as they confronted the reality of what I had built. About the difficult conversations that followed. Mostly, I think about the lessons that experience taught me. That family relationships can change, but only if everyone is willing to be honest about what wasn't working. That success on your own terms is worth the struggle, even when easier paths are available. That sometimes, the people who should believe in you the most are the ones who need the most convincing. I'm grateful for how things turned out. I have a company I'm proud of, work that challenges me, a team that shares my vision. I have a relationship with my family that, while imperfect, is honest and evolving. I have proven to myself that I didn't need their validation to succeed, which paradoxically made their eventual recognition meaningful. And I have that Gulfstream, that beautiful, excessive, unnecessary jet. It sits in a hangar at Boeing Field, ready whenever I need it. Sometimes I use it for business travel to client meetings and conferences. Sometimes I use it just because I can, because I worked hard enough to afford this particular extravagance. But mostly, it serves as a reminder. A reminder that success looks different for everyone, that the path less approved can lead somewhere extraordinary, and that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply showing up in a way that can't be dismissed or diminished. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've had your achievements minimized or your choices questioned, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by who sees it. Build your jet, whatever that means for you. Create something so undeniable that even those who doubted you have to recognize it. And when that moment comes, when your private jet lands outside their Thanksgiving dinner, savor it. Not because you need their validation, but because you've earned the right to be seen. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've experienced similar family dynamics or have your own tale of unexpected success, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success so complete that explanation becomes unnecessary. Subscribe for more stories about turning adversity into triumph, and never forget that the person who doubted you most just wasn't paying attention.